We've covered the first three Sangrahavastus so far, and today we come on to the Sangrahavastu called Samanarthata. And it was interesting when I was looking into this, Sadhaloka pointed me towards some earlier references to it, which I hadn't been aware of. And unlike the other three Sangrahavastus, Samanarthata's got a number of different meanings which have emerged over time. In the early Pali tradition, the translation was impartiality, which is something like relating to people without preference, so sort of evenness of response to people. The other translations I came across were sharing the joys and sorrows of others. And another one was sharing common aims. But the one I was introduced to was exemplification, which seems to be the translation that came through the more of the Mahayana tradition. One of the translations I quite like of it was practicing the virtues you recommend to your neighbours, which kind of really appealed to me. So it's kind of, yeah, practicing your stated values. So one of the things that was clear to me when we're talking about building the Buddha land is that in more sort of down-to-earth terms, it's really just about creating an environment for other people to practice, creating a positive environment for other people to practice. The Buddha land is nothing if it's not other people. No Buddha land, no people. So the Sangrahavastus relate to, they all sort of touch our human needs, if you like, or some quite basic human needs. They're very, very attractive values. I mean, we all enjoy being on the receiving end of generosity. We all like to be kindly spoken to. Many of us appreciate very deeply being around beneficial activity and being on the receiving end of beneficial activity. They attract us and they appeal to us, and they draw us in, which is why they're means for unification. Samanarthata, or exemplification, is also relates to very human tendencies, quite natural tendencies. When I was quite a long time ago involved in teaching in primary school, very long time ago, I remember an occasion where a friend of mine was doing a class, an art class, where he was encouraging the children to do portraits, like cartoon portraits, and many of them did portraits of him. And the portraits that came out the other side were of someone who was unshaven. His clothes were a bit dishevelled. He had bags under his eyes, and he didn't look that great. And he hadn't realised that the children were observing him quite so closely. And I think he changed his appearance after that. And I think it's something we learn at a very early age. Children always are right from a very early age are watching adults, and they're comparing what they say with what they do. And I think that this is something that we learn, from a very early age, and we carry it on into later life as well. We're always watching people, comparing what their stated values are against how they act. And when those stated values are lived out well, it kind of breeds confidence. And when the opposite is true, it erodes confidence. I mean, if someone tells you not to drink, not to smoke, and then they drink and smoke themselves, I mean, sort of how seriously do you take them? It can kind of undermine confidence. And I find I obviously do the same thing. Many of us do the same thing. And when I first went along to a Triratna class about 30 years ago, I was really impressed by the sense of positivity and warmth and friendliness of the people there. That really appealed to me. It really attracted me. But I was also on the lookout for, if you like, inconsistencies. Were people actually living out the values that they, that they stated? And I think this this has quite profound implications because, that's what I did in those days. And now and obviously the consequence of that is that that's what people will do to me, and that's what people will do to us. They'll look at us and they'll be comparing what we say with what we do. So in a way, what that means is that as Buddhists, we are ambassadors for Buddhism. And as members of Triratna, the degree to which we are, we're also ambassadors for Triratna. And perhaps unlike the other Sangrahavastus, this Sangrahavastu gains more and more weight the longer you practice. If you think about it, so if you practice, for a few years, and then 5 years, and 10 years, and 20 years, and 30 years, the longer you practice, I think, the more likely it is that someone is going to look at you and be thinking, what have they gained from that period of time? And do I want that? Am I likely to want to put the time and effort in to develop the qualities that they develop? How confident am I that that is going to lead to something positive for me? So you can see it starts to, it has quite deep implications about how we live our lives. I find that, my friends will often reflect back to me how I am. But even my non-Buddhist friends do that. Even my mum did it to me. I mean, I remember her one time just saying, Bodhiketu, I thought Buddhists didn't do that. That was my mum. And it was like, okay, so there's no escape. But it has a positive side as well, because it kind of keeps you on your toes. I remember there's an aphorism of Bhante's which I quite like, which is that an order member shouldn't seem as though they come from another country. They should seem as though they come from another planet. And I really like that one. Obviously, people who know me know why I like that one. But what it indicates is that, as one practices, one dissociates, becomes less driven by, if you like, conventional worldly values and more motivated by Buddhist values. And I think that's quite important. Sadlake was talking about my time with Karuna, and I've had a number of trips to India, and I often find that they can be very, very inspirational trips. And I remember one time I met this man, this order member in Mumbai called Anomadasi, I think his name was. And he lived out in the suburbs of Mumbai. He was middle class in a way. He was a bank manager for a bank in the middle of Mumbai, a deputy bank manager. He travelled 90 minutes each way into Mumbai each day on the most crowded train that I've ever been on. Literally could not move. There were people hanging off the sides of the train. And he had a family. He got up at 4 o'clock every morning and meditated for 2 hours. And then he did some exercise. And then he went to work. Then he came back. And he worked 6 days a week. And on the 7th day, he would meet people and do Dharma classes, and sometimes in the evening as well. And he was the chair of 3 groups of centres, quite small ones. It sounds unbelievable when I say it like that, but he did it in a very unassuming way. He was unassuming, modest. There was no sense that he was trying to put something on, and I was really inspired by this. I mean, it was just like you could feel the positivity and warmth and devotion just sort of flowing off of him. There was not a whiff of egotism about it. I was very impressed by that. But having said all of that, I'm not trying to say that as exemplars we need to be superhuman. I'm not saying that. I think it worked with Anomadasi because it was kind of the way he lived his life. But it will be different for different people. And those who know me know one of the qualities that I've come to value more than anything else nowadays is consistency of practice. I think I hold that as one of the highest values. Consistency of practice over, well, I tend to think of decades now, but that sort of consistent effort over a long period of time. And I find that, the people I live around here at Adhisthana, many of them exhibit that in ways which I find deeply inspiring. So I'm not trying to suggest that we should be superhuman, and sometimes it can take quite a long time to get to know people. So sometimes, like exhibitions of certain types of behaviour, like really positive behaviour, often I feel like I want to see more from someone. I want to see what they're like over a long period of time. So I get less inspired nowadays by single instances of Buddhist practice, and more by sort of consistency over a long period of time. And it can take quite a long time to get to know people and see that. Even the Buddha recognized this. There's a passage from the Udana which sort of, I think, reflects this, where the Buddha's speaking to King Pasenadi, and they're watching some ascetics go by, and King Pasenadi says, asks the Buddha if he knows the spiritual attainments of any of the ascetics that are passing by. And the Buddha says, well, you need to get to know someone really well over a long period of time in order to judge their spiritual attainments, if you like, where they are and what they're like. And you need to see them, especially in times of adversity, and how they speak over a long period of time. So I can't, he couldn't immediately tell what they were like. And then King Pasenadi revealed that actually these ascetics that were walking past were actually spies of his, which were just, which he'd been using, and they were just going to go and clean up and go back to their lives. So this sort of starts to get to the essence of what I think exemplification is about. It's not about displaying any particular type of behaviour over a short period of time. It's not about doing anything in particular. It's about exemplifying the process of spiritual development over a period of time. We're, as Buddhists, we are aspirational people. We have values that go beyond what we currently are capable of doing. So we kind of live this life of idealism. But what we're exemplifying is how we live our lives in relation to that. So there is an aspiration in our lives. We're living this process, we're exemplifying this process of spiritual development over a period of time, but we're doing it in a self-aware way, where we recognize when we fall short, and we recognize that we try and do something, we're not there yet. Sometimes we do well, and sometimes we fall flat on our faces. One of the things that I think is maybe one of the most important capacities, abilities as a spiritual practitioner, is to be able to pick oneself up after one's, failed, and sometimes failed catastrophically in the spiritual life. Pick oneself up, not feel too bad about it, confess, and learn from it and move on. I think that's one of the most important ones, and that if you can do that, that will that'll help you a lot. It'll help you a lot. So yes, we are ambassadors for Buddhism, but what we're trying to do is exemplify this process of spiritual development. That's what we're trying to do. And I think that that is the essence of what exemplification is. And in doing that, we build confidence in others in this process. And that is why it's certainly one of the important factors in the unification development of the Sangha. And obviously the reverse is also true. If one falls short, denies one's shortcomings, and so on, that can have the reverse effect. So it kind of cuts both ways. So I think that's all I wanted to say in terms of this Sangrahavastu of exemplification. There's quite a lot you could talk about, obviously, in here. If you want to have a couple of leaders, there's one obvious leader you can have for the groups. From your own experience, what have you found inspiring? What sort of example have you found inspiring in others that actually leads you to go deeper into the spiritual life? And that's a very easy one to start with, because you can see that from your own experience. The follow on from that is how can you be an exemplar, and what does that mean in terms of you being an exemplar?